The sound that filled the restaurant wasn't the gentle clinking of wine glasses or the low murmur of voices. It was laughter, ugly, booming laughter that bounced off the chandeliers and rattled the nerves of every guest. And it belonged to my son. Victor always laughed too loudly. As a boy, it was endearing. As a grown man, it had become a weapon, a way to fill the room with his presence until no one else could breathe. That night, in the most exclusive restaurant in the city, he laughed like a conquering king with his wife Vanessa at his side. Her laugh was lighter, but no less cruel. The two of them had perfected the art of humiliating me in public. The manager stood stiffly near our table, trying to keep his composure. In front of me, a black leather folder sat unopened. I didn't need to see the number inside to know what it would say. I already knew the game. I had seen it coming before they even thought they'd devised it, but I didn't flinch. I didn't panic. I had learned long ago that panic was the fuel my son and his wife fed on. They wanted to see the old lady squirm to remind me of my place. To them, I was always the widow who had never belonged in their world, who should have faded into the background once my husband died. But I wasn't gone. I wasn't finished as I sat there, my hands steady on the tablecloth. I let the memory of the past years roll over me like waves. This moment, their little performance, was nothing more than the latest in a long line of humiliations. And like all the others, it was meant to break me. But they had never understood the truth. The older you get, the harder you are to break. It began long before this dinner. Long before Aurelia and its velvet curtains and impossible reservations. It began when I married into the Harlan family. I was 24 the first time I stepped into their house. A house that wasn't a home but a monument. White columns, a marble staircase that swept up like a wave. Walls lined with portraits of stiff-faced ancestors glaring down at you. They didn't just live in that house, they ruled from it. And from the beginning, I knew I was a trespasser. I married Thomas Harlan for love. He was kind, gentle, different from the rest of his family. He saw me when no one else did. A girl from modest means. A secretary in a law office who had more books than dresses in her little apartment. He told me once, "You have more strength than anyone I've ever met." He said it with such conviction that I almost believed him, but his parents never did. They didn't come to the wedding. They sent a check instead, folded into a blank card. No note. At least they acknowledged it, Thomas had said, trying to make light of it. But I felt the truth. They had already judged me and found me wanting. When Thomas died, far too young, a sickness that came quickly and left quicker, I thought perhaps things would soften. That Victor, our only son, would see me not just as the mother who had raised him, but as a partner in grief. I was wrong. He had been young when Thomas died, but not so young that he couldn't have chosen which parent to emulate. And he chose the Harlans. He chose power. He chose cruelty. It started subtly at first. Victor's little dismissals, his sighs when I spoke at gatherings. Vanessa's sharp smiles that didn't reach her eyes. They'd invite me to dinners and seat me at the far end of the table where I had to strain to hear the conversation. If I tried to add something, silence would follow, as if I'd spoken nonsense. Then came the gifts. Always in public, always designed to remind me of my place. For Victor's 40th birthday, Vanessa handed me a box in front of all their friends. Inside was a floral apron, bright pink, with the words "Best Grandma" stitched across the front. They didn't have children. They weren't planning on any. Not that they'd told me. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. I folded the apron carefully, thanked her softly, and placed it back in the box. The laughter faltered just a little. My calmness always unnerved them. But humiliation was their favorite sport. They thrived on it. And over the years, they grew bolder. One night stands out sharply in my mind. It was after Thomas's funeral, perhaps a year later. Victor had invited me to a dinner at their home. I arrived in my best dress, one of the few expensive ones Thomas had ever bought me. Black silk with a pearl clasp. Vanessa met me at the door, her smile so wide it almost looked genuine. "You look so elegant," she said, taking my coat. "That dress is classic. My grandmother used to wear something similar." She let the words hang in the air. I smiled and thanked her. though I saw the glint in her eyes. Age was their favorite weapon against me. They couldn't stand the sight of me still standing tall, still refusing to shrink into the corner. That night, over dessert, Victor leaned back in his chair and began telling a story about one of his colleagues. A story that ended with the line, "She didn't know her place." And that's always dangerous, isn't it? He looked right at me when he said it. Vanessa giggled, resting her hand on his arm. I simply sipped my coffee, meeting his gaze without blinking. The silence that followed was mine. It belonged to me, and he hated it. But the cruelties piled on. When I bought myself a new handbag, a real indulgence. The first in years, Vanessa managed to accidentally spill red wine across it at a family gathering. "Oh, how clumsy," she'd said, though her eyes had sparkled with satisfaction. Victor chuckled. "That's why you shouldn't waste money on frivolities, Mother." I learned then that their weapons were never straightforward. They didn't scream or rage. They chipped away, cut by cut, until they thought I'd crumble. But I did not. I endured. And I learned, for years, I let them think they were winning. I let them believe I was powerless. I signed papers when they pressed them into my hands, trust agreements. Legal documents, all designed to keep the Harland legacy safe from me. They thought I didn't read them. They thought my quiet compliance was ignorance. They never understood that silence can also be strategy. The moment everything shifted was small, almost invisible. It was at another dinner, much like this one. When Vanessa leaned in close and whispered, "You must feel so lucky, Eleanor, to still be included in all this. Not many widows get to keep a seat at the table." I smiled, a real smile this time, because at that moment I understood something. They weren't just cruel. They were afraid. Afraid that no matter what they did, I would not leave. I would not disappear. And that fear made them reckless. So when Vanessa suggested one sunny afternoon at brunch that I take charge of reserving a table at Aurelia for their upcoming anniversary, I agreed at once. She and Victor exchanged a look, smug, satisfied. They thought they'd set the perfect trap. Aurelia, a restaurant whispered about in magazines, impossible to book, a place even governors struggled to enter. The idea was clear. I would fail. I would humiliate myself. And then they could laugh. But they didn't know my past. They didn't know that once, many years ago, a struggling chef had borrowed money from my late husband and me. A young man with eyes full of fire and hands that worked miracles with food. His name was Alastair. And now, decades later, he was the man who owned Aurelia. I had not forgotten him. And more importantly, he had not forgotten me. One phone call was all it took. Not as Eleanor Harland, widow of Thomas, mother of Victor. Not as anyone's appendage. I called as myself. And when I said my name, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then a voice, warm with memory, said, "Eleanor, I've been waiting years to hear from you." So the reservation was made, and the trap was sprung. Not for me. For them, I spent the weeks leading up to the dinner watching them preen. Victor boasting to his friends that his name alone had secured a table. Vanessa dropping hints in every conversation. "Of course we're going to Aurelia. Only the best, you know. Some people wait years, okay? Their delight was palpable. They believed the stage was set for my undoing. But I knew better. I knew what waited for them. And for the first time in years, I felt peace. As the night of the dinner arrived, I dressed with care. Not extravagance, never. That? I wore a dark blue dress, simple but dignified, with a brooch that had belonged to my mother. I pinned my hair back, steady in my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror, at the lines carved by time, the gray that framed my face. And I thought, this is not weakness. This is armor. Victor and Vanessa arrived at my door with their chauffeur. "Mother, are you ready?" Victor asked, his voice full of false warmth. I nodded, letting him offer his arm. He thought he was leading me into a trap. But really, I was leading him. The drive to Aurelia was quiet. Save for Vanessa's occasional commentary on the gowns of women we passed on the street. She liked to tear others down when they couldn't hear. I listened, my hands folded neatly in my lap, and said nothing. When we arrived, Aurelia rose before us like something out of a dream. Light spilled from tall windows. A doorman opened the door with a bow. Inside, the air was hushed, reverent, as though one had entered a cathedral. Victor straightened his shoulders, Vanessa's lips curved in a smirk. They thought the night belonged to them, but it belonged to me. Part one ends here, at the threshold. The laughter, the humiliation, the black leather folder waiting to be opened, all of it had been anticipated. And as I sat across from my son and his wife, their cruel eyes glittering, I knew the end of their reign was near. The sound of the wine pouring into crystal glasses was like a clock ticking down. Victor lifted his with exaggerated elegance, Vanessa following suit. To family, he declared loudly enough that the nearby tables turned their heads. They drank, savoring not the taste, but the attention. I lifted my own glass, sipping quietly. My calmness annoyed them, it always did. Vanessa leaned across the table, her perfume heavy, cloying. Eleanor, you must feel so honored to be here tonight. Not many your age get to enjoy such luxury. She said it sweetly, but her eyes glittered with poison. The first course arrived. Delicate arrangements that looked more like art than food. Victor speared a bite, chewed, and leaned back with a satisfied grin. Only the best for us. After all, Aurelia doesn't open its doors to just anyone. He wanted me to ask how he'd secured the table. He wanted me to feed his ego. I didn't. I simply smiled and set my fork down. The courses flowed, each more elaborate than the last. Conversations hushed around us as people recognized Victor and Vanessa. Names whispered like they were royalty. They soaked it in while I sat silently, absorbing every detail. The candlelight, the polished silver, the anticipation building with each glass of wine. Finally, the moment came. The waiter, eyes lowered in practiced deference, placed the black leather folder on the table. He set it not in front of Victor nor Vanessa, but directly in front of me. Vanessa's lips curved upward. Victor chuckled, low and triumphant. "Well, Mother," he said, his voice thick with false pity. "I suppose it's time you show us how resourceful you really are." Placed my hand on the folder, but I didn't open it. I let the silence stretch heavy and sharp. Vanessa leaned closer, eager for the spectacle. Victor's smirk widened. Around us, the restaurant seemed to lean in too, sensing the tension. When I finally opened it, I did not look at the number inside. I didn't need to. Instead, I looked across the table at my son. "Do you know what fear smells like, Victor?" I asked softly. His smirk faltered. "It smells like desperation dressed up as confidence. And tonight, I can smell it all over you." He blinked, thrown off. Vanessa frowned. "What are you talking about?" she hissed. Before I could answer, a figure approached the table. Alistair, older now, his hair silver at the temples, but his presence commanding. The entire room seemed to shift as he stopped beside me. "Eleanor," he said warmly, with a bow of his head, "it's an honor to have you here tonight. I hope everything has been to your liking." Victor's face drained of color. Vanessa's eyes widened. The room erupted in murmurs. The owner of Aurelia knew me by name. I smiled up at him. "It's perfect, Alistair." "Thank you." Alistair turned to Victor and Vanessa, his tone cool. "And thank you, of course, for joining us this evening. Eleanor's table is always open here. Tonight's meal will be, as always, complimentary." Gasps whispered across the room. Complimentary. The cruel trap Victor and Vanessa had prepared had collapsed into ash. But it wasn't enough. "Not yet," Victor recovered quickly, his laugh forced. "Well, that's very generous of you. But we couldn't possibly," Alistair cut him off smoothly. "It isn't generosity. It's gratitude. Decades ago, when I had nothing, Eleanor and her husband gave me everything. Without them, there would be no Aurelia. This restaurant exists because of their faith in me, and it always will." He bowed once more to me, then left us in stunned silence. Vanessa's face twisted. "You planned this," she spat, her composure cracking. "You knew." I set the folder aside. "Of course I knew. Did you really think I'd walk blindly into one of your games? You've been underestimating me for years. And tonight, it ends." Victor leaned forward, his voice low, dangerous. What do you mean? I met his eyes, unflinching. I mean that while you've been busy mocking me, I've been watching. While you've been playing at power, I've been securing it. Do you know who owns Harland Industries, Victor? Do you truly know? He stiffened. I do. I own it. I've run it for years. I shook my head slowly. No, you've managed it. Poorly. But ownership. That belongs to the one who holds the majority shares. 51% to be exact. And those shares are mine? The words struck like thunder. Vanessa gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Victor's knuckles whitened around his glass. You're lying, he hissed. I reached into my bag, pulling out a folder far more powerful than the one that held the bill. I slid it across the table. Inside, neatly arranged, were documents bearing signatures, seals, proof undeniable. His hands shook as he opened it, eyes scanning frantically. His face drained of all remaining color. You see, Victor? I continued, my voice steady. Every time you handed me a paper to sign, I read it. Every clause, every detail. And I signed only what I chose to sign. Over the years, I built my position quietly, patiently. You were so sure I was ignorant. That was your mistake. The room was silent, every eye on us. Victor looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time in his life. Rage flickered there. But behind it fear. Vanessa's voice was sharp, desperate. This isn't possible. You wouldn't know how. I didn't need to know how, I interrupted. I needed only to endure. And endurance, Vanessa, is something you will never understand. Victor shoved the folder back, his hand trembling. So what now? You think you've won? I leaned forward, my voice soft but carrying. I don't think it, Victor. I know it. Because tomorrow morning, the board will receive notice that effective immediately. Control of Harlan Industries rests solely with me. And you will explain to them why you failed. Or you will step aside. Either way, your reign is over. Vanessa's eyes darted around, desperate for support, but the restaurant had turned against them. Whispers filled the air, judgment heavy as stone. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. Thank you for dinner, I said. It was illuminating. Victor half rose, his voice breaking. Mother, but I didn't look back. Alistair himself escorted me to the door. As it closed behind me, the night air cool on my face. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom they had spent decades trying to break me. Tonight I had broken them, and I would never bow again. That was the true end of the Harlan cruelty. Not with a scream, not with a fight, but with silence, steady and unshakable, wielded by an old woman they had never truly seen until it was far too late.